John had always loved the land. The ranch had been in his family for generations, stretching across 15,000 acres of rolling hills, open fields, and forests. Each sunrise painted the sky in shades of orange and pink over the cattle grazing peacefully. John had spent his life caring for this land. He knew every tree, every stream, and every corner of the ranch. It was more than property. It was a part of his family's history, a place of memories, work, and pride. One ordinary morning, John received a letter that made his heart stop. It was official, stamped, and final. He could not believe what he was reading. The letter stated that his ranch had been sold, not by accident, but by the local homeowners association. They had acted without his permission. They had ignored every rule and law. They had treated his family's land as if it did not matter. John read the letter over and over, hoping his eyes were deceiving him, but the words were clear. His ranch, the land he had worked on since he was a boy, was no longer his. Shock made John feel frozen for a moment. How could this happen? He had paid taxes, maintained the land, and followed every rule. The idea that an organization could claim ownership of his family's ranch without consulting him seemed impossible. Yet, the documents were official. Someone had made a decision that ignored years of history and hard work. At first, anger rose in him like a storm. He wanted to yell, to demand justice immediately, but he realized that acting in anger could make things worse. John sat down on the old wooden bench near the barn. The wind moved gently across the fields, carrying the scent of grass and soil. For a few minutes, he let himself breathe. He let himself feel the weight of loss. The land was more than property. It was family. It was every memory of his father, teaching him to ride horses, every night spent watching the stars with his mother, and every morning caring for the cattle before the sun rose. Losing it felt like losing a part of himself. As the initial shock faded, John's mind began to focus. He had always believed in fairness and justice. He had never been the type to fight with anger or force. He knew the world had rules, and rules could be used to protect what was right. The HOA had made a mistake, and John was determined to correct it, but he would do it the right way. He started by gathering information. He spent days reading the letter, checking every document, and visiting the local offices. The HOA leaders were confident, acting as if their power was enough to protect them. John quickly learned that they had overlooked certain laws, had failed to follow proper procedures, and had ignored the most important principle: that land cannot be taken from its owner without due process. John knew he could not fight them alone, so he reached out to neighbors he trusted. Mary, a kind woman who lived on the edge of the town, had experience with legal matters. Daniel, a former lawyer turned teacher, offered guidance and advice. Slowly, John built a team of people who believed in fairness. They did not want revenge, only justice. With their help, John began to understand the full extent of the HOA's illegal actions and the possible ways to challenge them. Even as he worked, John faced small challenges. Some neighbors were afraid of speaking against the HOA. They had seen what power could do to people who opposed it. John understood their fear but remained calm. He encouraged them to stand together. Strength came from unity, and John knew that courage could grow when people supported each other. Nights were the hardest. John could not sleep thinking about the ranch, imagining it in the hands of strangers who did not understand its value. He walked along the fields, touched the fences, and listened to the wind move through the trees. Every sound reminded him of what was at stake. He remembered the stories his father told him about the early days of the ranch, when every tree was planted by hand, when every field was cleared by family labor. The ranch was not just land, it was history, and he would not allow it to disappear. John also reflected on himself. He realized that he had been patient and hard-working his entire life. He had never sought to harm others. Yet, here he was, faced with people who had acted without care or respect. That realization strengthened his resolve. He would not fight with anger but with wisdom. He would not act hastily, but with careful planning. The ranch had taught him patience, and now he would use that patience to seek justice. In the following days, John began preparing a plan. He documented every detail of the ranch, boundaries, property deeds, photographs, historical records, and even personal journals that proved his family's long ownership. He organized everything meticulously. Every document became a piece of armor, protecting him against unfairness. John understood that knowledge was power, and he would use it carefully. At the same time, he studied the HOA's structure. He learned how decisions were made, who had the authority, and what mistakes they had made. He discovered that several properties controlled by the HOA leaders were built without proper approvals. He also found small financial errors that could affect ownership claims. Each discovery gave him hope. He could not undo the past, but he could prepare for the future. John's neighbors began noticing his determination. Some were curious, others skeptical. But slowly, they saw that he was serious and careful. He did not act recklessly or angrily. Instead, he spoke calmly, explaining his plan and the importance of fairness. His approach inspired trust. People began offering information, advice, and support. It became clear that John was not just fighting for himself, but for everyone who valued justice and property rights. Despite the mounting pressure, John remained calm. He spent his days on the ranch, maintaining the land as if nothing had changed. He repaired fences, fed the cattle, and kept the fields in order. He knew that showing respect for the ranch was also showing respect for the law and history. He wanted the land to be ready, preserved, and protected. Even if the legal battle took months or years, John's bond with the ranch could never be broken. One evening, as the sun set over the horizon, John stood on a hill overlooking the land. The sky glowed with soft colors, and the wind carried the smell of fresh grass and earth. He felt a deep sense of calm. The ranch was his, not because of ownership papers, but because of the care, love, and history he had invested in it. He promised himself that he would fight, not out of anger, but out of respect for what was right. That night, John wrote down his plan in a notebook. Step by step, he would challenge the HOA's actions. He would gather evidence, consult experts, involve the community, and take the matter to court if necessary. He understood that it would be a long and difficult journey, but he was ready. The loss of the ranch had been painful, but it had also awakened a new determination within him. John's story was no longer just about land. It was about justice, fairness, and standing up when the world seemed unfair. The next morning, he would begin the first steps of his fight, not with anger, but with strategy, courage, and hope. The ranch had survived generations, and John was determined that it would survive this challenge too. After the shock of losing his ranch began to settle, John realized that anger alone would not help him reclaim what was rightfully his. The homeowners association had acted without authority, but John knew that fighting them required more than frustration. He needed patience, strategy, and knowledge. The ranch had taught him to work steadily, day by day, and now he would apply the same discipline to this challenge. John began by reviewing every document connected to the ranch. He examined old property deeds, tax papers, and family records. Each page held a piece of proof, a reminder of generations that had worked to build and protect this land. As he studied, he also wrote notes, creating a timeline of ownership and responsibilities. Every detail mattered. Every date, signature, and law reference could strengthen his position. He knew he could not rely solely on his own knowledge. John reached out to Daniel, a former lawyer who had moved to their town years ago. Daniel had always been respected for his intelligence and careful thinking. When John explained the situation, Daniel's eyes widened and he agreed immediately to help. "This is more than a mistake," Daniel said. "It is an illegal action and you have the right to fight it. But we need a plan, a careful plan. One wrong move could make it harder for you." With Daniel's guidance, John began mapping out the HOA's activities. He learned that several key leaders had acted without approval from their members. They had ignored essential rules regarding property sales and had failed to notify the rightful owners. John documented everything in a large notebook, creating lists of irregularities and possible mistakes. The more he studied, the more he realized that the HOA had left openings, weaknesses that he could use to ensure justice. John also turned to Mary, his neighbor who was known for her knowledge of local history and property matters. Mary had grown up in the town and knew many of the families connected to the HOA. She helped John understand the social connections and community dynamics. The HOA relies on fear and silence, Mary said. People are afraid to speak, but if they know someone is careful and fair, they might support you. Strength comes from allies, John, and you already have some. Slowly, a plan began to take shape. John knew he could not act recklessly. If he rushed into legal action without preparation, the HOA could find ways to block him. He would gather evidence, consult experts, and quietly build support. Then, when the moment was right, he would take action that could not be ignored. While John worked on the plan, he also studied the properties owned by the HOA leaders. He noticed small but important mistakes in their documentation. Some houses were built without proper permits. Others had boundary errors, and a few financial records seemed unclear. John was careful not to jump to conclusions, but he noted everything. Every small error could become a tool in the legal process if used correctly. Every evening, John walked the ranch. The field stretched endlessly under the sunset, and the wind whispered through the trees. The ranch was more than a prize. It was a connection to history, family, and life itself. John promised himself that he would protect it. His connection to the land reminded him that his fight was not for revenge, but for fairness. Every step, every fence repaired, and every tree planted was a reminder of why he could not give up. Neighbors began noticing changes in John. He seemed calmer, more focused, and more determined. Unlike others who might lash out in anger, John worked quietly, carefully, and patiently. Some neighbors became curious, approaching him with questions. "John, are you really going to fight the HOA?" asked a young man named Henry who had watched the events unfold from a distance. John smiled. "I am going to do what is right, Henry. I am not trying to make trouble. I am trying to ensure that fairness is restored. If people act carefully and wisely, we can fix what is wrong without harming anyone, but we have to be smart, patient, and calm." Word slowly spread that John was preparing a careful response. The HOA leaders were unaware of the growing support he had. They assumed their power would protect them. John had learned from experience that the element of surprise could be powerful. While the leaders acted confidently, John quietly gathered his evidence and built alliances, making sure every detail was verified and accurate. One afternoon, John discovered something significant. While reviewing property maps, he realized that several HOA leaders had minor errors in their home ownership records. Some plots were incorrectly registered, some property taxes were unpaid, and some construction permits were missing. These small details could be legally significant. John felt a spark of hope. These errors could allow him to challenge their properties legally, just as they had challenged his ranch. John spent the next weeks carefully confirming these findings. He double-checked each document, compared maps, and verified dates. He visited the county office, spoke with clerks, and reviewed public records. Every confirmation strengthened his plan and gave him confidence. He was not acting impulsively. He was preparing a careful and fair response. At the same time, John also prepared himself mentally. He knew that legal battles could take time and patience. He trained himself to remain calm, to respond to setbacks with reason, and to avoid actions that could harm his credibility. He understood that fairness and intelligence would be his strongest tools. John also began imagining the day justice would be restored. He pictured the court session where the HOA leaders could not deny the evidence. He imagined the moment when fairness would triumph over power and arrogance. These thoughts gave him energy. Each day as he worked on the ranch and his plan, he felt stronger. The ranch had survived generations, and now its legacy would guide him in this fight. During this time, John also shared his plan with a few trusted neighbors. They offered advice, support, and encouragement. Some helped him gather old records, others helped track property details. Slowly, John's quiet effort became a community effort, not out of revenge, but out of a shared belief in fairness. One evening, John stood on a hill overlooking the ranch. The sun painted the sky in bright gold and red, and the cattle moved calmly across the fields. John felt a deep sense of purpose. He had a plan, he had allies, and he had evidence. More importantly, he had patience and determination. The fight ahead would not be easy, but he knew it was possible. John returned home, sat at his old wooden desk, and wrote down his step-by-step strategy. Step 1. Gather and verify evidence. Step 2. Document HOA errors. Step 3. Build community support. Step 4. File legal claims strategically. Step 5. Ensure the ranch's restoration and fair compensation. Each step was detailed, thoughtful, and careful. John understood that this plan was not just about winning. It was about doing what was right. As he closed his notebook that night, John felt a quiet sense of excitement. This was not a journey of anger or revenge. It was a journey of justice, patience, and intelligence. The ranch had always taught him that slow, steady work could achieve great results, and now that lesson would guide him through the challenge of reclaiming what was rightfully his. After months of careful preparation, John felt ready. He had gathered every document, verified every property detail, and built a quiet network of support in the town. The homeowners association still acted confidently, unaware that the rancher they had wronged was no longer powerless. John's patience had given him an advantage, and he intended to use it wisely. The first step of his plan was legal action. With Daniel's guidance, John filed official claims challenging the illegal sale of his ranch. Every form was carefully filled, every document attached in perfect order. The court system moved slowly, but John was patient. He had prepared for months, and he knew that time could be his ally. At the same time, John quietly investigated the properties of the HOA leaders. He had discovered earlier that several homes had irregularities. Now he took the next step. He confirmed construction permits, ownership boundaries, and tax records. Every small mistake was verified, every error documented. John knew he could not act recklessly. The law required precision, and he was ready to meet that standard. As the legal case progressed, tension in the town began to rise. Neighbors noticed a change in the behavior of the HOA leaders. They spoke in hushed voices, showing signs of concern that had not been there before. Word spread slowly that John was challenging the association with careful planning. People began to wonder if the rancher they had always seen as patient and calm had quietly grown powerful. John never acted with anger. He made sure his communications were polite and professional. Letters sent to the HOA outlined his findings, explained the legal errors, and requested proper action. He avoided threats, insults, or public arguments. His strategy was simple: use intelligence, evidence, and law to make the association face the consequences of its own mistakes. One morning, John received notice that the court had accepted his initial claim. The judge reviewed the documents and agreed that there were legal grounds for a case. The HOA leaders were shocked. They had assumed their power would protect them, but now they were forced to respond to the law. The realization brought anxiety among them. John, however, remained calm. This was the moment he had prepared for, and he knew that patience and careful work were paying off. John then moved quietly on the HOA properties. He filed separate legal claims for several houses owned by the leaders. The claims were based on errors he had discovered months earlier. Each filing was accurate, precise, and legally sound. John's goal was not revenge. It was fairness. The leaders had acted illegally regarding his ranch, and now their own mistakes could be corrected through proper legal procedures. The first property case went to court. John presented his evidence calmly, explaining the errors clearly and logically. Daniel stood beside him, offering guidance and support. The HOA leaders tried to argue against the evidence, but John's preparation left them little room to respond. The judge carefully considered every detail, asking questions and reviewing the documentation. John answered patiently, showing that his claims were based on law, not anger. As the hearing continued, neighbors gathered outside the courthouse. They watched silently, impressed by John's calm approach and careful strategy. Rumors spread quickly. People admired how a simple rancher had faced a powerful association with intelligence and careful planning. John's quiet strength inspired respect, and soon, some neighbors began offering additional information that could help him further. Each case against the HOA leaders revealed more errors and weaknesses in their claims. John remained methodical, presenting facts without exaggeration or emotion. The court proceedings were long and detailed, but John's preparation made the difference. Every document, every date, and every verified fact strengthened his position. The leaders began to realize that their previous confidence had been misplaced. During this time, John also continued to maintain the ranch. He repaired fences, tended the fields, and ensured the cattle were safe and healthy. The ranch remained a symbol of his dedication and patience. Visitors often commented on how calm and focused John appeared, even while managing legal battles and community attention. He smiled politely and explained that careful work and patience were always the best tools. One afternoon, John discovered an important new detail. While reviewing one of the HOA leader's property files, he noticed that a house had been sold to the leader under questionable circumstances. The previous owner had not been properly informed, and the documents lacked essential signatures. This discovery could make the property claim invalid. John carefully documented everything, taking copies, photographs, and expert notes. This new evidence strengthened his strategy and brought a renewed sense of confidence. John also spent time speaking with neighbors who had been affected by HOA decisions. Some had been afraid to challenge the leaders, fearing consequences. John reassured them, explaining how law and careful preparation could protect their rights. Slowly, people began to see that justice was possible. The network of support John had built quietly over months began to grow stronger. The next step in John's plan was coordination. He filed legal claims against multiple HOA leaders simultaneously. The effect was immediate. The leaders were forced to divide their attention, respond to multiple court filings, and face the consequences of their errors. They had acted against John with arrogance, assuming their power would shield them. Now they were vulnerable, and John's methodical strategy made the difference. As each court date approached, John remained calm and composed. He prepared notes, practiced presentations, and reviewed evidence with Daniel. He never allowed stress or frustration to influence his approach. Every step was deliberate, careful, and professional. The rancher had learned that calm intelligence was stronger than anger, and his confidence reflected that lesson. One day during a hearing, a judge commented on John's preparation. "It is clear that the claimant has studied every detail, verified every document, and prepared each argument carefully. This level of preparation is impressive," the judge said. The words were not only encouraging but also a reminder that fairness and careful work could achieve what power alone could not. As the hearings progressed, the HOA leaders began to feel the pressure. Their initial confidence turned into worry. They had acted recklessly against John's ranch, and now they were discovering that law and careful preparation could expose their own mistakes. Some leaders tried to negotiate quietly, offering minor settlements, but John remained focused on fairness, not compromise. He wanted justice, not advantage, and he would not settle for less than what was right. John's reputation in the town grew. Neighbors admired his calm, patient approach. Young people in the community began speaking about him as an example of courage combined with intelligence. Even those who had once doubted him started to see the strength of preparation, patience, and fairness. John did not seek recognition, but the respect he earned reflected the truth. Standing up for what is right requires courage and careful planning. By the end of the season, John had achieved several small victories. Court hearings had confirmed some of his claims. HOA leaders were forced to correct errors, and the community support he had quietly built had strengthened his position. The first stage of his plan was complete. John had acted not with anger but with intelligence, patience, and respect for law. As he walked across the fields of his ranch one evening, the sun setting in gold and red, John felt a deep sense of calm. He had begun the strike, and it was working. The HOA leaders could no longer ignore him. The ranch, the land his family had nurtured for generations, remained a symbol of fairness, patience, and justice. John knew the fight was not over, but he also knew that careful preparation and unwavering determination could achieve what seemed impossible. He returned to his farmhouse, sat at his desk, and reviewed the progress. Each small victory was recorded, each court date noted, and every detail checked. John smiled quietly. He had begun the strike against the HOA, not with anger, but with reason and law. The journey ahead would be long, but now he had the confidence to continue. The ranch had survived centuries, and with care, strategy, and patience, so would justice. The months of careful preparation and patient planning were beginning to pay off. John had executed the first stages of his plan, filing legal claims, gathering evidence, and quietly exposing errors in the homeowners association's actions. The town watched with curiosity, and the tension around the HOA leaders grew. Now the moment had come for justice to make its presence known. John's legal battles had reached a critical point. Court dates were set for major hearings, and each session brought new revelations. The evidence John had meticulously collected could not be ignored. Judges reviewed property deeds, tax records, and permits with great attention, noticing the irregularities that John had pointed out. Each small victory strengthened John's confidence. He had acted with care and patience, and now law was on his side. The first hearing of the day focused on the illegal sale of John's ranch. The HOA had claimed authority, arguing that procedural mistakes could be overlooked. John's evidence, however, was precise and thorough. He presented decades of records, photographs, and legal documents showing that his family had owned and maintained the ranch for generations. Daniel, standing beside him, added legal interpretations to support every point. The judge listened carefully, reviewing each document. John spoke calmly, explaining the facts without emotion or accusation. "This is not a matter of anger," John said. "It is a matter of fairness. My family has worked on this land for generations. The sale of this property without proper authority violates the law." His words were simple, yet powerful. The clarity and honesty impressed the courtroom. Outside, neighbors had gathered. Word had spread that John was not only defending his land but doing so with integrity. People whispered quietly among themselves, observing the calm confidence of a man who had been wronged, yet chose to fight with patience and wisdom. Children looked on with wide eyes, and elders nodded in quiet approval. John's approach was teaching the community a lesson in courage and justice. Meanwhile, the HOA leaders were nervous. Their previous confidence was gone. They realized that John's careful planning had left them little room to respond. Lawyers representing the HOA attempted to argue technicalities, but John's evidence was complete and verified. Each point they raised was met with calm explanations and documented proof. The leaders' panic grew quietly, and their arrogance began to crumble. During the hearings on the leaders' own properties, John applied the same careful approach. He presented evidence of errors, irregular ownership, and missing permits. Judges considered each detail carefully. John spoke with respect and clarity, never attacking personally, only pointing out factual discrepancies. The HOA leaders could not deny the evidence. Their attempts to delay or dismiss the cases failed. John's preparation had made the law his strongest ally. As the hearings progressed, the first major victory arrived. The judge ruled that the illegal sale of John's ranch had no legal foundation. The court ordered the property returned to John's name and confirmed his family's full ownership. Relief washed over John. The months of preparation, patience, and careful investigation had succeeded. His ranch, the land of his family's history, was restored. The weight that had pressed on his shoulders for months finally lifted. However, John did not stop there. He turned his attention to the HOA leaders. Their properties were now under scrutiny, and the errors John had documented could not be ignored. One by one, hearings revealed the irregularities: misfiled documents, missing permits, and unpaid taxes. Each judgment favored John's claims, showing that the law must protect fairness, no matter who the parties are. Neighbors watched in awe as the HOA leaders faced consequences for their actions. The same people who had acted confidently, believing their power made them untouchable, were now correcting their mistakes. John never gloated or acted cruelly. He simply allowed the truth and law to work. Justice was quiet but powerful, and it left the community with a clear example of integrity. The process was not without challenges. Some leaders tried to appeal, hoping to delay or reverse the court's decisions. John remained patient, reviewing each new document, consulting Daniel, and making careful legal responses. His persistence and careful attention made each attempt at delay ineffective. The leaders slowly realized that their previous arrogance had been their weakness. They had underestimated a man who valued fairness and preparation over anger or force. One particularly important hearing involved a property that had been built without proper permits. The HOA leader had argued that the errors were minor and should be forgiven. John presented verified documents, photographs, and witness statements. He showed that the irregularities could affect ownership and that the law required proper compliance. The judge agreed. The property's legal status was corrected, and the HOA leader had to take responsibility for the mistakes. John's victories were becoming symbolic. The town began to see that fairness and careful work could overcome power and arrogance. Neighbors spoke of John with respect and admiration. People who had once been silent now offered support and information to ensure the law was followed correctly. John had quietly built a community that valued integrity, patience, and fairness. By the time the final hearings approached, John's strategy had reached its full effect. The remaining properties of HOA leaders were reviewed, and each judgment confirmed the careful work he had done over months. Errors were corrected, legal titles were adjusted, and compensation was awarded where necessary. The HOA had been shown that unfair actions could not stand when met with patience, evidence, and law. The last hearing ended with a sense of closure. John spoke briefly, thanking the court and the neighbors who had quietly supported him. "This is not just about me," he said. "It is about fairness and respecting what is right. Law protects those who act with honesty and preparation, and it must guide our actions in every situation." His calm words resonated with everyone present. The HOA leaders were humbled. Their power had failed to protect them from legal consequences. They realized that careful preparation, patience, and knowledge could be stronger than authority or confidence. John's example left a lasting impression. They quietly corrected remaining errors, ensuring that the town would remember this as a lesson in fairness. John returned to his ranch after the final hearings. The fields stretched peacefully, the cattle grazed calmly, and the sun set over the hills in a soft orange glow. The ranch was restored, not only in ownership, but in dignity and history. John felt a deep sense of satisfaction. He had not acted out of anger. He had not sought revenge. He had acted with patience, intelligence, and respect for the law, and justice had been achieved. Neighbors came to congratulate him quietly. Mary, Daniel, and others who had helped in small ways were among the first to visit. They celebrated not with loud parties, but with smiles, handshakes, and quiet conversations about fairness. The community had learned a valuable lesson. Standing up for what is right requires careful thought, preparation, and courage, and even the most powerful cannot ignore law and justice. John continued his work on the ranch, repairing fences, tending the fields, and caring for the animals. He felt proud not only for reclaiming his land, but for demonstrating that fairness could succeed without anger or aggression. Each day, as he walked across the property, he remembered the long months of planning, patience, and preparation. Those months had taught him that justice is not sudden. It grows steadily, supported by evidence, wisdom, and integrity. By the end of the season, John's reputation as a calm and intelligent leader had spread across the town. Young people admired his example. Neighbors respected his courage, and even former opponents acknowledged his strength. The HOA leaders, though humbled, began to rebuild their relationships with the community, guided by the understanding that power alone is not enough. Fairness, law, and careful preparation were stronger than arrogance. John knew that the fight was not about revenge, but about demonstrating what is right. The ranch was safe, the community respected fairness, and the HOA had learned a lesson they would not forget. Justice had been restored, and John's careful strategy had ensured that integrity would remain a part of the town's life. As night fell over the ranch, John stood on the hill overlooking the fields. The wind moved gently, the stars began to appear, and the ranch seemed peaceful and alive. John smiled quietly. The journey had been long and challenging, but it had shown the power of patience, preparation, and fairness. The ranch had survived generations, and justice had survived as well. John returned home, feeling calm and fulfilled. He knew that the next steps in his life would involve care and continued attention to his ranch, but the battle with the HOA had ended. The land was his family's history was preserved, and fairness had been restored. The lessons of patience, preparation, and justice would remain with him forever. After months of legal battles and careful preparation, John finally felt the weight of victory settle on his shoulders. The Homeowners Association had been forced to correct its mistakes, the illegal sale of his ranch was reversed, and the community had witnessed the power of patience, planning, and fairness. But for John, the journey was far from over. The ranch, his family's heritage, needed care, and the town had lessons to learn about integrity and respect. The first morning after the last court ruling, John walked across his fields. The sun rose over the hills in soft shades of gold, casting long shadows across the land. The cattle grazed calmly, the wind rustled through the trees, and the streams sparkled under the sunlight. Everything seemed peaceful, yet John knew that maintaining the ranch was a responsibility he could not take lightly. He checked fences, repaired barns, and inspected the fields. Each detail mattered, and he wanted the ranch to thrive, not only for himself but for the generations that would follow. John also focused on building relationships with his neighbors. During the legal battles, many people had quietly supported him, offering advice, information, and encouragement. Now he wanted to strengthen those connections. He spoke with Mary and Daniel, thanked them for their guidance, and invited other neighbors to share their thoughts about the community. John believed that a strong community, guided by fairness and respect, could prevent similar problems in the future. The HOA leaders, having faced the consequences of their previous actions, approached John cautiously. Some apologized for their mistakes, acknowledging that arrogance and power had blinded them. John listened calmly. He did not act with anger or seek revenge. Instead, he explained the importance of law, fairness, and careful planning. Slowly, a cautious respect formed between John and the former HOA leaders. They understood that their past behavior had been wrong and that fairness must guide future actions. John began to implement improvements on the ranch. He planted new trees along the hillsides to prevent soil erosion, repaired the old barn so it could store more equipment, and added new water troughs for the cattle. Each project was carefully planned. John believed that work done with care and intelligence was more valuable than hurried or reckless actions. Neighbors often came by to help, bringing tools, ideas, and encouragement. Together, they strengthened not only the ranch, but also the community bonds that had been weakened during the legal disputes. During this time, John also started mentoring younger people in the town. He shared lessons about patience, planning, and integrity. He explained how careful research, verification of facts, and calm reasoning could solve even the most difficult problems. The young people listened intently, impressed by the quiet strength and intelligence of the rancher who had faced powerful opponents without anger or force. John's experience became a guide, a story of resilience and fairness that inspired others. As the seasons passed, the ranch flourished. Fields were healthy and productive. The cattle grew strong and the trees and streams remained well cared for. John found satisfaction in each small success, understanding that steady work produced lasting results. The community began to see that John's approach had not only restored his land but also strengthened the town. Fairness, preparation, and respect for law became principles that neighbors discussed and practiced. One afternoon, a group of neighbors gathered near the ranch house. They shared stories of the past months, recalling how John had quietly and patiently fought for justice. "I never thought one person could make such a difference," said Henry, the young man who had once doubted John. "But you showed us that fairness and careful planning are stronger than power." John smiled, appreciating the acknowledgement, but he reminded everyone that the lessons were more important than the victory itself. John also reflected on his own life. He realized that the experience had taught him more than legal skills or strategic thinking. It had reinforced the values that his parents had passed down: patience, respect, hard work, and courage. He understood that true strength comes from knowledge, careful planning, and integrity, not from anger or force. His victory over the HOA was not simply a legal success. It was a triumph of character. The HOA leaders, humbled by their experiences, began to act differently. They took steps to ensure their actions respected the law and the community. They corrected remaining property mistakes and worked quietly to rebuild trust. John observed these changes with satisfaction. He had not sought revenge, but the experience had transformed the leaders, showing them that fairness must guide all actions. As time went on, John continued to strengthen the ranch and the community. He organized small workshops to teach neighbors, about property rights, legal procedures, and the importance of documenting ownership carefully. These sessions were not lectures but conversations, sharing knowledge and encouraging careful planning. People appreciated John's approach. They respected his calm intelligence and learned that preparation and patience could prevent conflicts before they started. John also planned for the future of his ranch. He created records and maps to ensure that future generations would know the history and boundaries of the land. He trained his children and relatives in ranch management, property care, and the importance of integrity. John wanted the ranch to remain a symbol of family heritage, fairness, and careful work for generations to come. Even the town began to change in small ways. The story of John's fight against the HOA became well known. People respected the idea that fairness and careful planning could overcome arrogance and misuse of power. The community slowly adopted practices that emphasized honesty, verification, and respect for neighbors' rights. John had not only restored his ranch, but also left a lasting impact on the values of the town. John often stood on the hills overlooking the fields in the evening. The sky glowed with soft colors, and the wind moved gently through the grass and trees. He thought about the long journey from the moment he first received the letter that threatened his ranch to the day justice had been restored. The journey had been challenging, but every step had reinforced his belief in patience, careful planning, and integrity. The ranch, the community, and even the HOA leaders had learned valuable lessons. John knew that the world often tested people with challenges, but those who acted with intelligence, fairness, and patience could overcome almost anything. He had faced powerful opponents, yet he had maintained his calm, avoided anger, and used law and careful preparation to achieve justice. That was a lesson he hoped everyone would remember. As night fell over the ranch, John walked through the fields one last time for the day. The stars appeared one by one, shining brightly over the land. He felt a quiet sense of satisfaction. The ranch was safe, the community respected fairness, and justice had been served. John had proven that strength is not measured by power or force, but by careful planning, patience, and integrity. Before going inside, John paused by the old oak tree near the barn. It had stood for generations, a witness to family history and hard work. He placed a hand on the rough bark and smiled. The tree reminded him that life is built slowly, step by step, with care and attention. Just like the tree, the ranch had survived storms and challenges, and with proper care it would continue to thrive. Inside the house, John sat at his desk reflecting on the journey. He wrote a few notes about what he had learned. Patience is powerful, preparation is key, fairness must guide actions, and knowledge is stronger than arrogance. He hoped that someday his notes could guide others who faced challenges, just as he had learned from his parents and neighbors. The ranch, now secure and thriving, became a place of peace and learning. John continued to work the fields, care for the animals, and share his experience with neighbors. He knew that life would bring more challenges, but he was confident that the principles of patience, preparation, and fairness would guide him through anything. In the end, John's story was more than a victory over the HOA. It was a story of perseverance, intelligence, and integrity. The ranch survived, the community learned lessons in fairness, and John's careful and patient approach left a lasting legacy. The land, the history, and the values it represented were preserved, ensuring that generations to come would remember that justice is strongest when guided by patience and wisdom.